And look, I appreciate the tolerance of me being slightly late. It's great to be here, and doesn't the year whiz by when we're into a September quarter meeting for our Audit and Risk Committee. We have a full agenda and a great set of papers. Ken, thank you to you and your team, as always. I guess we expect it, but the fact that it's delivered meeting in, meeting out is something which I always want to acknowledge, and thank you for the preparation your team's put into this. And I wonder if we should then just go straight to business. Can I first deal with apologies? As I say, I think we've got a full muster, but do we have any apologies that we should note at this stage?
No, none that I've been informed of.
Thank you very much. Okay, so matters of members' interest. Is there anything in the agenda that members need to raise their interests over? Being none. Late items, I haven't been informed of any late items. Do we need to take account of anything at this stage?
No, there are no late items.
No late items, thank you. And ultimately, confirmation of the order of the meeting. We certainly are taking insurance renewal first, because I can see Matt and Dee are there. We certainly are very keen to hear from them over our insurance. And I think having gone through the agenda with Ken on Friday, we will just follow through as anticipated. That's a reasonably well-worn agenda, and it makes a lot of sense. People are happy with that?
Yep.
Sweet. Okay.
So we need a mover and a seconder for the...
I was going to get there.
Sorry, Bruce.
I might be bereft of some parts of standing auditors, but I do recognise the old
Awesome.
And I was just going to say, given this is the first resolution, I find on Zoom it tends to be easiest if the chair moves those. Roger, you've done the second best thing, which is the second, and also to raise your hand at the same time or yell at me, which is great. And I've also checked with Ken. I think our practice here is when I ask for either support or voting against it, you use your voice. And if it doesn't appear to be majority, we can always go back to using the reactions or whatever. So in that good form, I will move. Roger, thank you for seconding that we confirm the agenda. All those in favour, please say aye.
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 Those against? It's carried. Thank you very much. Can we move to the minutes, item 5.1? And I just wonder if there's anything of correction or matters that people would like to raise.
Yeah, Bruce, I've got two minor items.
Sure, Claire.
So on page 14 of our agenda, or page 7 of the minutes, it's item 12, right at the last three words on that page. Mr. Morris's, it doesn't need an S after the apostrophe.
Good point, Ken. You'll know that better than I do, but I presume it doesn't.
Yeah. And then over the page, item 13, the first word under capital program should be manager. That's misspelled.
All right. Yes, indeed it is.
And that's it.
Okay. Brilliant. Thank you, Claire. Are there any other matters that people would like to raise in terms of its accuracy? I've just got a couple of points I want to raise afterwards, but they're nothing significant. Okay, I'll put the motion that we accept these as a that we accept. Sorry, I just noticed Tauranga, and this was actually reflecting my interests. I've gone back too far. My apologies. We accept these minutes as a true and correct record. Do I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Claire. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against? It's carried. Ken, just a couple of things out of it. It was good to actually just reflect on the minutes. I noticed that we did at the last meeting. It was great to be reminded of this, the KPMG forward risk management gap analysis. I just thought it was useful. I don't know whether Leon joins us later, but obviously that's useful in terms of approaching the sign off on the annual report and the fraud questionnaire. It reminded me that actually we had done some good work as far as that's concerned, and I presume that would be it. Can I just ask a question? Ken, the Waka Kotahi funding, at the time of the last meeting, and certainly it was the case for most councils, we're all getting a bit worried about the numbers, the money, having been signalled as being cut under the National Land Transport Plan. I presume Waipa, like most other councils, has been reasonably comfortable with the revised numbers coming through, correct?
Yes, so through the chair, yes, I understand that. Actually, yeah, I'm not sure exactly where the roading team are right now with that. Actually, I do know we've got Dawn on the on the call, so yeah, so she could probably answer that better than I am. But yeah, but look, certainly at the time, we addressed this, by way of an audit issue around the audit of the long-term plan. And we were fairly comfortable where things are at. But yeah, Dawn, you can speak to this.
Kia ora koutou, everyone. So the most recent announcement from Waka Kotahi has reinstated our pretty much our full allotment of maintenance operations and renewals funding. But what's happened is our minor road improvements, our resilience improvements, our walking and cycling program have pretty much been cut in half in terms of the amount of funding for those capital programs. So Mr. Hudson will be presenting a report at service delivery tomorrow, giving a bit of an outline. We're a little unclear as to what discretion council holds around how we apply those reductions in funding in terms of whether it's particular projects that have been crossed out or whether it's funding that can be reallocated and reprioritised locally. So we'll work through that. But yeah, it's certainly maintenance operations renewals reinstated is I guess, removed a lot of risk and worry, but the capital program is quite hard hit.
Thank you, Dawn. Look, and I appreciate that probably has to go through, as you just noted, other council businesses, but I just realised it was a risk that we dealt with and, of course, mentioned inside our minutes. So thank you for that update. Right, if we could then please, we've already moved, the minutes is accepted. Thank you for that chance just to follow up on that. We can move to item 6, which is the insurance and update, insurance renewal and update. And Amy, I think do we have Amy? Yes, you were there, Amy, perhaps to lead off with key points before we invite Matt and Dee to speak to us. Thank you.
Yeah, so we've had a couple of changes throughout this year. We've changed from Marsh to Aon for our public liability and professional indemnity insurance. So that happened as of the 1st of July 2021. And the other one is that we have been looking into possibly providing staff, including council members, life insurance up to 100,000 as a paid benefit council. And we're still waiting for confirmation on a quote from them at this stage, but that is, what we've been doing.
Brilliant. Thank you, Amy. So if I've got it correct, this is, of course, a briefing from Aon in the lead up to the renewal of the insurance policies, which is 1 November this year, I think, if I've got it correct. So it's a good time for us as a committee to consider the nature of what Matt and Dee are trying to negotiate on our behalf prior to it actually being placed, and gaining an overall sense about how this fits within our overall risk management process. So let's come back to that at the end of it, although I'm sure Matt and Dee may well comment on that as we go through it. So Matt and Dee, welcome to our meeting again. It's always good to see you guys. Still in pretty odd circumstances, so although perhaps they're becoming more normal. Can I invite you to give us your presentation, and then I presume at the end of that we take questions, or would you like it during it? How does it suit you guys?
I think in this medium, if we could do it at the end, it tends to be a better way of doing it. So I'm not sure how long we have. I will go through this as quickly as is appropriate, but please, happy to take questions at the end. So I've got with me in Hamilton, colleague of mine, Deanna, who's heavily involved in the programme from the council programmes across New Zealand from a strategic point of view, and currently in lockdown in Auckland, although I'm not going to waft a barista-made coffee in front of the screen because I think that might have come back and bit me in the posterior, is my colleague Matt Bilderbeck, who's up in Auckland, who is more on the risk management side of things and sort of risk strategy. So I will endeavour to share a screen with you. Hopefully I can press all the right buttons in the right order. I've failed already. Share screen. That one. Okay, hopefully you can see questions at the moment. I'll just get this back to the top. So, that one?
Yep.
Right. Hopefully you can see the presentation now.
You can see it fine. Ollie Stoken said you see it fine. Thank you, Matthew.
Excellent.
Everybody else can.
Okay, so we'll go through this. There's a few key topics we're going to talk about. As Bruce has alluded to, we are slap bang in the middle of the renewal process for you. The policies are due 1 November. Ken was part of a team who presented to the London markets about 2 weeks ago in the evenings to line up with London times. That was around the infrastructure insurance program, which relates to your reticulation assets, the three waters, that sort of stuff. I think, again, slightly strained circumstances doing all this through VC, but I think it was well received and we've had some positive feedback from the markets. The market's very much like engaging with people rather than just sort of faceless numbers and spreadsheets. So Ken, thank you for your time doing that. And also we did the same to the local markets again via VC. So hopefully all these buttons work. Yep. I'll give you a quick overview of the global market. Now, this was written in Q1 and the comments there refer to all types of insurance. This is sort of an overview of the global market. And as you will see, there isn't much green in there. We are largely looking at sort of red and ambers, but that is in relation to all policies and is not territory specific. So we have seen, again, certainly in the property space, the biggest driver is natural disaster weather events. There was the horrific flooding in Germany. There's been other wildfires. They are just continuing with frequency and severity. So from a property point of view, that is what is driving the global market. At the time this was written, the COVID losses hadn't materialised. However, there are still a couple of court cases going on offshore about how insurance policies should or shouldn't respond to that. So that is a little caveat at the moment. But one piece of good news is, and think of this almost as a supply and demand type situation, insurance premiums have increased over the last 3 to 5 years. With that increase, the premium base has shifted upwards. So that now means that there is alternative capacity. Providers are coming in with capital. They didn't want to play in the insurance market 3 to 5 years ago because the premiums were too low. Now that the premiums are coming up, there are other institutions who are prepared to put capital into the insurance market. So that is a good sign. That is a hopeful sign that we may be looking to a stabilisation of rating. So that's the sort of global comment. This is, again, this was written Q1, Q2. If we just look at the arrows, and then I'll talk about New Zealand specifically. So for material damage business interruptions, those are your property programs, we have seen historically pricing increasing. We have seen insurers look in high risk areas to drive limits down. This is the overall amount of cover that you can buy. We have seen insurers look at deductible levels, retentions, how much you carrying to your own balance sheet for various risks. And they're also trying to narrow down the breadth of cover. The obvious example is there are now very clear, concise exclusions as to how the pandemic infectious diseases clauses apply, or don't, as the case may be. This slide shows that there has been a reduction in capacity. That's actually turned a corner now since it was produced. But probably the biggest component is that we are still seeing that increase in natural disaster weather events and natural catastrophe losses. So we can't get away from that. Now, what I will say is for New Zealand, we are actually seeing a slowing down of rating increases if you're located in a relatively benign natural disaster area. And primarily we're talking about earthquake. Now, I got into trouble a few years ago when I said the Waikato doesn't have an earthquake exposure. It absolutely does, but compared to other parts of New Zealand, it is relatively benign. So currently, our expectation for the material damage and business interruption rating is between 5 to 10% increase. We have some other councils who are due in June, and they are again not in a particularly poor seismic area, and they saw rating increases that are euphemistically called mid-single digits. So you're talking 5%. And indications from the market currently is hopefully that's where we're going to be sitting. That is a slowdown and is perhaps the first sign that for those less risky, less high seismic areas, we are seeing a turn in the market, which is good news because we've been through a very tough market for everybody. That's a brief snapshot of the material damage and business interruption. The professional indemnity is a slightly different space. We are seeing pricing increasing across the board. Now, this isn't a council-specific comment. I will come to some council-specific issues in a second. We have seen an increase in pricing. We have seen insurers try and write back the cover. So they're putting endorsements onto policy to limit exposures. And we're also seeing a reduction in this market of capacity. Claims are not going away. They are continuing to occur. Now, the pricing in New Zealand for local authorities is largely driven around losses relating to building consenting issues. There have been a number of high-profile cases. The Bella Vista apartment block, which is in the public domain, is an example of that. We have been through 3 lead insurers on the liability placement for over the last 6 years. So insurers have come in, they've offered to lead the program, and then they've left because the claims have been too high. We are currently, the program is led by a company called Berkshire Hathaway. Berkshire Hathaway is obviously a huge financial institution. They are not, they don't have terms dictated to them by reinsurance. Berkshire Hathaway don't buy reinsurance, therefore they underwrite everything themselves. And they are committed to the local authority space. Now, a couple of years ago, they did increase premiums quite dramatically. That was, they felt there needed to be a market correction. It had been underpriced previously. The information we are being given from them at the moment is that we're not expecting to see those dramatic premium increases again. They seem to be quite comfortable with where things are at now, in that they are collecting a sufficient premium in their mind for the potential exposures. They will be looking at how to improve areas in relation to building consenting. What are you doing about internal communications? And this isn't a wiper comment, this is a general council portfolio comment. So we are working with the council to get an understanding of how that stuff works. There were some additional questions on the proposal form that needs to be done every year, specifically around the building consenting. So hopefully for this renewal, we again should be looking at relatively flat numbers in terms of pricing. That's quite a bold statement on my part, which is why I say relatively flat. But that is sort of the expectation that we're at the moment. I go to the next slide. So one of the things that we have embarked on with councils, and Wiper are doing this, which is why a colleague of mine, ours, Matt Bilderbeck, is here, because we ran something called an insurable risk profile with yourselves. Now, this is again a generic historic comment. For a lot of local authorities, insurance over the last 10 years has been a transactional purchase. You have a list of insurance policies that you need, you go out and buy them. Now, the diagram that's on the screen, hopefully that you can see, is a sort of paradigm for working out how much insurance you need. If you look at the very top left-hand quadrant that says optimizing insurance, I've had a lot of local authorities come to me and say, we need an insurance strategy. And the driving factor for them saying we need an insurance strategy has been the fact that their premiums have increased year on year on year on year. And if you're getting a 20-25% increase in your insurance premiums and you do that for 4 years, you've got a 100% increase. That was not sustainable. But the problem with that conversation is it's a little bit tail wagging the dog. The insurance spend was being used as a trigger for an insurance strategy. It should actually be a risk mitigation, risk understanding strategy that then leads into, okay, we understand this, how much insurance do we need to buy? And then you're making a more informed decision. And again, this is a generic council comment. You're not being a taker of what the insurance market is prepared to give to you. You're actually structuring a program for your needs. So this year we have gone through sort of this cycle, and we are still going through it. It is iterative, it will refine, etc., etc. So part of that was this risk positioning piece and the determining risk. Now, loss modelling has been done in the past where you determine the financial exposures, that's the loss volatility and estimation. That's focused very much on the physical stuff. But these are all sections that we need to go through and understand. And then as an organisation, you get to this point where you say, okay, well, we're happy to have X amount to our balance sheet, or we don't think that particular risk is so severe that we need to treat it with a risk transfer to an insurance program. So we can then design collectively what an insurance program should look like for you. So that's very much just a framework, but we are starting that journey with council. And as always with these things, there has to be cost benefits, but you've got to understand all of that, what your risks are, what your exposures are, how you're prepared to treat them, before you can work out that cost benefit from an insurance point of view. This is very difficult just talking to a screen, by the way. So one of the first areas that we focused on, again, with all councils, is better quality data. We need to know what you've got, where it is, how much it is worth, and what its exposures are. And that's quite simplistic. If you think about buildings or infrastructure, that's the sort of information that we need to have. And we've worked with council to improve the quality of that data to get better information so that everybody knows we're working with the best information available. That then can lead into the whole determining the risk appetite, the risk tolerance within the organisation. And then that can, again, turn, following that hexagon, into what does an insurance program look like. But unless we have the values right in the first place, then it's very difficult to determine what those exposures actually are and quantify them into dollars. We need to know the values are right. So that's a piece of work we've been doing, and Amy has provided us with property schedules and the like, so that there's quite a lot of work's gone into that in the background for WIPA. Again, I think it's iterative, it can improve, and that's again a generic council comment, we can always improve this. So what can you do to manage those insurance costs? So these are the questions that we asked. And this just is what can you control and what can't you control? You can't control the insurance market. The insurance market is going to do what it does. I'm from the UK. The New Zealand market is a relatively small percentage of the global market. So there are other considerations that are outside of your control. So the market will be what the market is. But what you can do is think about how you approach the market, how much insurance do we need to buy, those sort of conversations. So these are just sort of some highlights of key points there. Now, there's a number of sort of animations that come on this side, and this is almost a little bit sort of insurance 101. Please, it's not meant to be condescending in any way. This is just how some of the things that we think about. So what you have here is sort of a loss curve. And if you imagine this is the pricing, so if you have high frequency, so those going up the left-hand side, but low cost, think motor insurance, then this is what kills insurance programs. It's the high frequency, low cost events. So the question that then says is, where do you want to attach? All insurers understand that there might be the catastrophic event that sits out right on the extreme right-hand edge. They are high value, high severity, but they are low frequency. Insurers buy insurance. Insurers reinsure, reinsurers reinsure, et cetera, et cetera. So what we have to look at is the impacts that the market has or where you position yourself on this curve. So again, if you take that dotted red line, you can think of that as what the market is currently doing. The pricing has gone up. That's why we're shifting above that black line. And when you get into soft markets, the pricing can come down. See what the next animation is. So if we then take that, we understand that where that blue line and the black line intersect, if we imagine that's where your deductible is, your excess. As you can see on the pricing, this curve, if you were to shift that to, if you keep that as it is, sorry, anything to the left of that line is what you pay yourself. It's your deductible. And again, think your motor insurance with your $500 or your household insurance with your $250,000, whatever it might be. That's the deductible component. The second component is how much insurance do we buy? Do we buy insurance for the absolute catastrophic event? Now, I know we're being broadcast live, but I'll give you a genuine example that I get asked is if I do one of these in Topol, somebody says to me, well, what happens if the lake goes up? And the response is normally, well, it's such a major national catastrophe. Do we want to be looking at an insurance program that is going to cost a lot of money to buy billions and billions of dollars worth of cover when actually the chance of it happening are very, very remote? So what is the maximum probable loss that you want to look at? So the amount of insurance then that you buy also impacts the cost of the insurance program. I'm hoping this is all making sense. None of this is rocket science. So now we've got two blue areas on the diagram, which are both effectively self-insured or uninsured. You've set a loss limit at a certain point, and you've set a deductible at a certain point. The insurance covers the bits in between. The deductible is for your own balance sheet, and if there's a catastrophic loss, then there's, again, either your own balance sheet or a different funding mechanism comes in, depending on what the loss is. So what are the impacts of moving those deductibles? If you shift the deductible to the right, you see you come further down on the pricing scale. So by electing, and again, the easiest example is your own domestic insurances, for example, if you've got a $500 deductible on your household insurance and you shift that to a $2,000 deductible, you should see a reduction in your pricing because you are moving the attachment point of the insurer further to the right of that curve. And then that's where you get the green graphic. Conversely, if you go the other way, you increase the pricing. If you elect to go from 2,000 to 500, your pricing is going to go up. And again, simple concept, same with the loss limit. If you buy less insurance, you will have less cost, but you have a greater exposure to your balance sheet. If you buy more insurance, you go to the right side, you get the red markers, you have an increase in cost. Now, this is all relatively straightforward, but then I'll just go through all of these animations. So again, we've got that point where we established the pinky bit in the middle is the bit you're in buying insurance. This is somebody else's capital you are buying to deal with those problems. Why are values important? If the values are accurate and the loss modelling has been done is accurate, and that is largely determined, the accuracy of that is largely determined by the quality of the data. If that's all accurate, you can comfortably set a loss limit. However, if the values are incorrect, you can end up with stuff that's sitting in the blue. So one of the bodies of work that we've done with councils over a number of years is, as I said, historically insurance is dealt with by finance teams. There's nothing against finance teams. Finance teams always operate on depreciated replacement costs. They're knocking the numbers back as the lifespan of the asset decreases. What we want on an insurance program is your replacement cost, not a depreciated number. Because if we're using depreciated numbers, there is the possibility that you could end up with stuff being in the blue sector, because we've based a loss limit on a depreciated cost, not a replacement cost. Wiper are pretty good at this. We've done a lot of work with the guys over the last 18 months, 2 years, having this conversation, and there's been an improvement in that. Also, changing values may mean that you can move the deductible. Oh, I've gone too far, sorry. Changing values may mean that actually we're over-insuring. If you are disinvesting of assets, if you are changing what your portfolio looks like, you may end up that the limit we've set previously is no longer required and you can come back a bit. You know, these are just considerations, and this is all part of that original hexagon that we put on the screen about going through a process to understand what you've got, where it is, what's its exposures. Next slide, isn't it? Mm-hmm. So we call this a leaders presentation because, as I said, you can't change the market, but there are some things you can pull, some levers you can pull to change some of the values of your insurance program, the deductibles, et cetera, et cetera. And this is just a real summary. What is controllable? Your risk management, active engagement with the markets. And I said, I started off saying that Ken was part of a team that presented to the London markets. That's absolutely key. The insurers knowing who you are, seeing that you're real people, seeing that you're taking this stuff seriously really helps with that relationship. And then retention. What can we retain? Are there properties that you have that you wouldn't actually rebuild? You know, if you lost it, would you rebuild it? If the answer is no, why are we insuring it? Now, I know there are political considerations within that, and I'm not going to go down that at the moment, but that's just a process to think. What would we replace? Would we replace it? So then your appetite, how strong is your balance sheet? What are you prepared to accept? And then it's slightly obscured on my screen, but it's are the reinstatement values sufficient? Have we got the numbers right? So those are the sort of conversations and considerations that we're having at the moment. I come from a small business background. We can have these lovely conversations up here, but I am always the one that asks the question of my colleagues, okay, so what's the cost benefit? And I'll make no bones about this. We could have, and we will do this, we're starting to do the modelling in preparation for the renewal. We're doing something called as-if modelling. So what we're taking is Wiper's material damage and business interruption claims history over the last 5 years on the current deductible level. We are then putting a number of options on that. So if we shift the deductible by an amount, what does that actually expose Wiper to if you use the last 5 years claims history as an example? And B, what do we think that's going to do to the premiums? Now, I don't know the outcome of the premium conversation yet, and we're still finalising the as-if modelling. But when I say I'm the one that asked the question, if we come back to council at renewal and say, we can save you $20,000 on your insurance premiums for your material damage and business interruption, but it means you increasing your deductible to $250,000, and given the last 5 years claims history, that meant you would have spent an extra, let's say, $350,000 on claims to your own balance sheet. The question to be asked is a saving of $20,000 sufficient to warrant moving the deductible? And I fully understand that there has to be that right cost benefit. So that is what we will be reporting back at renewal as we get all the terms back, a number of excess options, and whether there is deemed to be sufficient cost benefit to you to make that decision. So that's sort of the culmination of the other bits and pieces that leads to that. I think that's the last bit I've got. Yeah, so I'll now get Matt Bilderbeck to talk to you. This is, as I said at the outset, we did an insurable risk profiling, oh God, some time ago now, but COVID got in the way of all sorts of things. So this is a summary of that, and I'll pass this over to Matt to talk about.
Thanks, Matt. So to recap, there are some positive signals from the market, but we're still in a challenging insurance market. And that means that we need a strategic approach to get the best outcomes. So basically, to summarize all the text in this slide, what that means is a shift from decisions based on historical approaches or what has always been done to transparent decisions based on documented evidence and analysis that's part of an integrated risk strategy. We can probably jump on to the next slide, Matt. So on that basis, we've gone through the process of evaluating your risk profile against our framework, which is shown here. We included your staff in that process in a workshop. As Matt said, that was held some time ago when they still let me out of the house. And we consider, we recommend, or we suggest you consider implementing these recommendations, basically to make sure that you can continue getting the right insurance for you at the best possible price, best terms and conditions. So I'll talk through the top 3 recommendations here and provide a bit more background to those. The first one is around enterprise risk management. So that's your overarching drive of your approach to insurance. Now, like Matt was saying, typically insurance has been seen as a procurement item or a finance item, and risk management has been seen as something separate. But in reality, insurance is a risk management tool, and it should be considered in the context of other risk management options. Things like the potential to avoid an activity, thereby avoiding the risk altogether, the potential to reduce the likelihood or consequence of a risk, options to transfer the risk contractually, or simply accepting a level of residual risk based on your risk appetite and the strength of your balance sheet. The second recommendation relates to your material damage policy and your infrastructure policy. It's about your processes for selecting what assets make it onto your schedule and the sums insured of those assets. So you can insure every single one of your assets if you like, but you don't have to. There may be particular assets that you decide to self-insure because you see them as being particularly low risk, or you simply wouldn't replace them if they were damaged. And the point is we recommend formal processes around those decisions. We also recommend reviewing your asset valuations to make sure they're suitable for insurance purposes. Now, as Matt said, you've made some good progress in this area already, but it's worth recapping. If you think you would replace an asset like for like following a loss, you need an insurance reinstatement value, and that will consider things like demolition costs and an inflationary provision. Otherwise, you could find yourself underinsured. But again, there might be assets that you don't want to replace like for like, and you might just want to insure them for removal of debris or for an indemnity value. The third recommendation relates to your infrastructure insurance. You buy cover, infrastructure cover as a group as part of the Waikato LAS. And as a group, you have quite a substantial loss limit. There was some modelling done to inform that back in 2016. We recommend an update to that to account for changing asset base, new modelling methodologies. Also, as a council, you have a sublimit of $80 million. So you have over 600 million of infrastructure assets. But if there were an earthquake, and we're talking low likelihood, but centred in your district, you'll only ever get up to that $80 million between insurance and central government support. So we recommend reviewing that limit, that sublimit, based on analysis of your exposures, and that would be in the form of infrastructure loss modelling. And we produce what we call a probable maximum loss estimate for an earthquake event. So we think those 3 recommendations are your biggest bang for buck in terms of benefits you could get. And we think they'll get you looking at insurance strategically as part of a wider risk management process. It's going to help protect your balance sheet and your community by ensuring you insure assets for the right amount and making sure those limits align with your exposures. Again, yeah, we just recommend taking an insurance approach because the costs of insurance are increasing and in certain cases, availability is reducing. So back to you, Matt, to summarise.
Thank you, Matt. There is currently a piece of high-level loss modelling work being done for the Waikato councils. Once we get the results from that, then we can potentially have further conversations with WIPA directly as to whether there's any anomalies in there. So we're doing a region-wide piece currently at no cost to the council. That was part of a recent tender process that we went through probably 18 months ago now. So there's some work being done in that space. We have also, you haven't seen it yet, but it will be with you shortly. Matt spoke about asset selection. What would you insure? Do you want to insure everything? Our valuations team have put a guide together for an asset selection process, which will be sent in the next couple of days. When we spoke to other councils, it became relatively clear that there was no formal asset selection process. So Peter Ursig, our valuations manager, has engaged with probably about 25, 30 councils and taken their various responses and sort of wrapped them all into one guideline, as it were, which highlights some of the processes that might need to be considered. And the last piece that we're currently working on is some education modules to assist with yourselves, members of Audit and Risks, et cetera, how insurance works, what are some of the considerations in this whole risk framework that need to be considered. Again, it all links to that better data gives better outcomes. And whilst we are obviously more than happy to do audit and risk presentations, have these conversations with you, if we can provide some documentation that can be shared, which allows for yourselves to get an understanding of some of the conversations that we're having, you can see this stuff in front of you. Hopefully that will help in the decision-making process. I think that is us. Yeah, that's us. So thank you for your time. Is there any questions?
That's very helpful. Thank you, Matt D and Mike, I think it is. Yes, thank you for your hard yards. So look, yes, let's have a couple of minutes of questions for these good folk and then we'll consider the rest of the paper. Do I have any questions, please? Yes, Claire.
Thanks, Bruce, and thanks, Matthew, for your really great presentation. The question I had was more about something emerging, like, with the cyber attacks that we've had. I mean, have you got any comments on how that might be changing, particularly for New Zealand, because we've had a number of quite high-profile attacks just recently?
Yes, and my wife works at the Waikato DHB. It is a problem. Deanna was doing some research for us, and I think cybercrime was the single fastest growing crime globally. It's costing billions and billions of dollars. I'm paraphrasing. It's an interesting market. Sorry, excuse me. It's an interesting market. I think, this is a personal opinion, I think we will find insurers restricting terms and conditions as to the extent of cover that you can get. But we have a dedicated team of people within Aon who just do cyber, and they're in constant communication. So as soon as we know more, we will share that information with you. But yes, it's a very valid question.
Thank you.
Matt, one question, or Michael could like just ask here is, so all this work is being done. We've got a placement on 1 November. What updated information are you and Ken and co working on that would be relevant for that placement on the 1st of November?
Well, we've had all of the updated property schedules through. and we've had the infrastructure schedules through. So we're now waiting for the market terms to come back to us. We've asked the market for various deductible options. So once we get that information back, then we will be able to report back to you as to, okay, this is what the premiums are compared to last year. This is what your values have done. Here are 2 or 3 options that you can decide upon. And these changes can be done post-renewal. Once you get a 1 November renewal date, if we're then able to have a bit more of a deep dive, the next audit and risk meeting or whenever it is, if that's a month after renewal, we can always make those decisions then and change. So you're not fixed once you've got to 1 November. That's just the anniversary date of the policy. But as I say, hopefully we'll be able to have those options come back to you and see what the changes are. As I said, I'm the one that always asks the question, what's the cost benefit? My historic experience with councils is that they are conservative with a small c, and I fully understand the reasons why behind that. So that's why we'll have the conversation with you to see what your appetite is like for that.
And I take it from your presentation that actually your recommendation that we take a comprehensive insurance lens with our risk management, that you're suggesting we're not doing that at the moment.
I'm suggesting it can be done better.
A diplomatic, mate.
Well, you see, honestly, I wouldn't say you're not doing it. There are some councils I know who are not doing it. The insurance is a transactional, procurement-based decision. We've worked with the Waikato councils for a long time now. We've been having this conversation for quite some time. There's been a change in attitude, but I never say that anything is perfect. I think we can, again, depending on cost benefits and your own appetite, look to refine it even further. You're going down the track, and it's a good conversation to have. We're also trying to get the strategy meetings. So we have a group, Aon Act for a lot of councils in New Zealand now, and you all have some shared learnings. So Ken has been to one of these meetings. We had a group of various council representatives down in Wellington. We sat down and we thrashed out what are all the common things that we need to address, how are we going to go about doing them. So the conversation I'm having with you in about 5 minutes, we're doing another one of these to Ruapehu District Council. I will be having exactly the same conversation with them. It is iterative. It can be done better. Is there an appetite to do that better? Does it make anything substantial to your exposures? Does it make anything substantial to your cost savings? Is it worth pursuing forwards? But that phrase, well, we've done it like that for the last 10 years. Why fix it if it ain't broke, sort of thing? Well, let's just explore it in a bit more detail and see where we can move down that path. And Bruce, as you know, we were trying to have a conversation with you guys as well at that higher level, if you want, that overarching level, because there are a lot of common themes.
Ken, Amy, I wonder whether there's anything you would like to add here now that we've, as a committee, got that very good overview from our colleagues. But actually how you see it and how you're applying it now to the Waipa situation.
So look, I'll just briefly respond. Thank you, Matthew, for the presentation. That's that's good. Hey, look, I echo Matthew's comments there that I think we are making good progress. So I'm quite involved in the insurance space, not only obviously at Waipa, but across the Waikato, in terms of chairing the Waikato Less Insurance Advisory Group. And look, I think I think we are making some real inroads into a more strategic focus on insurance. So look, I think that's only going to get better over time. Matthew did talk about that regional loss modelling exercise, which we have just kicked off. That's a refresh of what we did a few years ago now. You would have seen when the other Matt was presenting, that was one of his 3 priority areas, just to be to be much more on cue in terms of what our loss modelling is. So that's just an example, I suppose, of some of the progress that we're making.
Brilliant. Is there any other questions? I need to open it up to the paper as well. I've got a paper in front of us. So Matt and Dee and Matt, if you guys need to shoot through to Ruapehu, we could leave you to it. We do have a little paper here to consider as well, certainly usefully in light of all your comments. If you need to go, feel free to dive off. Appreciate you've got other commitments. But look, for the rest of the committee, can I just check, are there any questions people would like to raise of Ken and Amy over the actual paper as it stands at the moment? No?
Yeah, Bruce, Andrew here.
You go, Andrew. Yep.
Yeah, that whole presentation is very interesting. I'm pleased to see that a strategic approach is being taken to this, because certainly to keep reinsuring as we've done in the past isn't a very good way to go, I suppose. But the whole thing, like there's, as Matthew mentioned, there's effectively elements of self-insurance involved in this. And I guess on the left-hand side of Matthew's graph, that is undertaken on a day-to-day basis. It's the smaller things, the excesses on vehicles, etc. On the other side of the graph, that's the major disasters or whatever. And while I guess to a large extent we're expecting central government to pick up the tab on those events, is it worth looking at placing some of the premium that we would have paid into an investment type situation to allow us to grow our capacity to deal with the bigger events that come up, like with instantly, without going through the process of going to central government, etc. I guess that's my question. Have we considered that at all? Even on the other side of it, shifting that left-hand vertical pillar to the right to take care of the bigger, more common events. Is some self-insurance via a setting aside of effectively what the premium you would have paid? Does that make sense? Is that an option?
Thanks, Andrew. Ken, is that something in part of the pot?
Yeah, look, it could possibly be. I'm not sure if Matthew's still got time to perhaps respond to some of that. I mean, that loss modelling exercise that we talked about, of course, is quite critical in the space, in that loss limit space. So the right hand side of the graph. That reinforces the importance of that. In the infrastructure space, Andrew, you commented on the 60-40 arrangement with the Crown. Where clearly we do have quite considerable reliance there. But look, several years ago, we put in place, and in effect it's referred to in the report on the agenda, the infrastructure insurance primary layer. So councils actively, the Waikato councils at least, actively involved in addressing the risk in terms of the primary layer, but of course, in the wake of a catastrophic type disaster, obviously still reliance on the Crown under that 60-40 arrangement. But look, Matthew, I don't know if you've got opportunity just to speak to that, but I guess the basic answer to your question is yes. Looking at that pretty constantly, in terms of what we can do in that space.
If I may just add to that, the as-if modelling that I mentioned earlier on, that's its primary function, is to allow you to see, okay, if we move the deductible along the curve, so we expose ourselves at a balance sheet level to a certain amount, what are we saving in premium? that will hopefully allow that sort of informed decision to be made, because it is those low value frequency events. They're the ones that are going to cost, and you're quite right with the analogy of the motor insurance. If we use that for the material damage, and your deductible, I think at the moment is $10,000. That's off the top of my head. Is that correct? For say a fire loss. In the corporate world, that's a really, really small number. You know, a similar size property owner in the corporate space would be looking at 150 to 250, some even up as much as sort of 500 to $1 million. But what are we going to get by premium relief? And that's the point of the as-if modelling, and that can be undertaken on a couple of other policies as well. The motor insurance is, in relative terms, quite cheap at the moment, so I wouldn't currently advocate looking at doing anything there. However, certainly on the material damage, there is that consideration to be made, which is what we're hopefully will be able to report back to you this time around and say, if you go from here to here, it's going to save you $50,000. Is that sufficient for you to make that decision with a rough understanding of what you're going to have exposed? The problem at the other end, in terms of on the diagram where I showed you reduce the loss limits, the problem with that is if you have two, you might have a fund of money that, okay, if you buy and I'm just making the numbers up, let's say you buy $100 million worth of cover for the catastrophe type event, and you might have a little bit in the kitty, I don't know, I've got no idea, but you might have a little bit in the kitty that if it's 110 or 120 million, then you're okay. The problem is what happens if we have two. And yes, statistically it's unlikely, but it might happen. And it's just understanding that cumulative effect of some of those exposures as well.
Thank you, Matthew. That's very helpful, and obviously we've got no set answer for that one at the moment, Andrew. But it's indicative in the loss modelling that Matthew and Ken say that we're undertaking. Claire, you got your hand up?
Yes, I have, Bruce. Thanks, Matthew. You're just talking about damage like to buildings and how a $10,000 excess, you know, in a corporate setting isn't actually. It's pretty small. I just wanted to raise that, and it came up in the Pirongia Ward Committee because a lot of the people there look after their community halls, and at the moment we have a $10,000 excess for fire loss and other major damage. But the thing is, what council is doing is expecting those community hall associations to meet that excess, and so I just wanted to flag either, particularly to you, Ken, that if you are considering increasing the excess, that in that particular situation, it's quite a lot of money to come up with for those, you know, hall associations, and that I just wanted you to safeguard that really, if you were thinking of increasing the excess.
Yeah, so note that. Yep.
Thank you there, Claire. Just a couple of questions from me about the policy cover generally. I had wondered how you're going to meet the $500,000 excess, which perhaps we might be saying is low, but under infrastructure insurance, we actually have a reserve, or we just use our debt headroom. I just interested in that. The other thing was with the cybersecurity, the limited liability was $1 million, and I think probably I was seeing that as being a number pretty much standard around the sector, perhaps not inconsistent with your question, Claire. I was wondering whether that was actually enough, perhaps in light of the Waikato DHB experience. And I guess probably what would always interest me is what would come under that, given the extraordinary cost that I suspect Waikato had to go to internally to actually just deal with the issue.
Yes, and I'm not a cyber expert, so I've got to be a little bit careful how I answer this question. You do have an extensive cover in relation to those additional costs, and you also do have an extensive cover for things like ransomware, engaging with a third-party specialist to come in to help sort the problem out if it's something you can't do internally. I can provide you a separate answer to that question. As I say, I unfortunately know enough about cyber to be dangerous. So I would much rather defer and provide a more complete answer in writing to give you a summary of what's available.
Like, I think this, like, even dare I say, Claire's question, Ken, just raises one or two of the comments, or Andrew's comments, that are in our mind as you move towards 1 November and we ultimately get a report back on what seems possible. So perhaps if I just leave that as an open rhetorical question, which you guys will deal with, let's take it on that basis. Colleagues, I sense time's moving on for not only our guests but also ourselves. Is there any other questions we have, or will I move to the motion? If that's the case, can I move to the motion, please, which is simply that we receive Amy's great report. Amy, thank you for your organisation day. You can see that it's actually given rise to a fair bit of discussion. It always inevitably does. So thank you for that. So look, I will move from the chair that we receive Amy's report. Do I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Claire. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against? It's carried. Thank you very much. Hey, thank you, you guys. As I said, I'm conscious you guys need to move.
Thank you.
My committee secretary is about to tell me, Bruce, have you looked at your time? So it's been well worth spending the time with you, Matthew, Deanna, and Matt. Appreciate your time, and we'll catch you guys later.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
Bye.
Right, Jenny, that has played with my time, but I guess it was important to hear these folk move through their work, which I think has been valuable. So, Jenny, let's move to refresh the top risks and the risk appetite statement. Again, really good work. I appreciate your key comments, and then I'll open it up for discussion, please.
Hi, so George here. So
Sorry.
it's me, and Jenny is here too. We're both here. Hey, so both of the documents that you've got, the top risks and the risk appetite statement, are the outcome of the workshop that we had prior to the last ARC meeting. So this has gone through a number of discussion rounds with the executive team, and they have reached an agreement in regards to these. I'm not going to go through all the detail. I guess the first document, what we're looking from you is that you're comfortable with the top risks, the description, the ratings and the mitigants. The second attachment around the risk appetite statement, it's a portfolio-based approach to assessing what our risk appetite is. Just a point of note there that a new portfolio has been specifically added post the fraud audit around what Council's risk appetite is for fraud, bribery and corruption. So that's now a separate portfolio that has been rated separately. And so from that document, what we're looking for is that you are comfortable with the risk appetite ratings that have been selected there. So probably two chunks, Chairperson, is the first document and then the second document. Yeah.
That's probably good advice. Thanks, George. So look, with that, I would open that to comment. I'm looking particularly at, gee whiz, the first page of the first appendix, which has the summary of top risks, which has both the heat map, showing what our raw risk is, what our residual risk is, and what our targeted risks are, as well as also in the right-hand column, the complete suite of the 14 top risks. I just wonder whether that would be something to focus our discussion on. We've been through this process, we've got it, so I'm open to discussion. Thank you, Roger. You can lead off the batting. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, can hear you fine. Thank you.
Yeah, good. And it's not really a point for discussion, rather than just a request. Number 10, failure to prepare for climate change impacts. All of the other risks that we have on that chart, we've had considerable discussion on, but I just feel that that's one that's kind of gone into the background a bit, and we're just not seeing any discussion around the council table on that. So perhaps to Gary and to Mayor Jim, if we could maybe have a workshop on that, I'm sure that that would better inform all of the councillors so that any risk could be better assessed.
Thanks for that. We also get to looking at deep dives later in the agenda, Roger. But look, you've made a key plea to both Jim and to Gary, and I'll again treat it on that basis. That we'll treat it as rhetorical, mate. They've heard it, I suspect. Yes, you're nodding your heads, and we'll see where we get to. Claire, you got your hand up.
Yes, thanks. George, I just thought with the top risks, I just felt there's been a bit of movement, and not that I'm wanting to change the document itself, but just to get some comments from you. Firstly, the number 3, which is failure to respond to COVID-19, which is very high residual. I actually think Council's done really well in the resurgence context, and given the government's commitment, I think, to also provide support, I was just wondering whether or not you thought that might be able to be reduced a little bit. You probably have seen more behind the scenes about how everyone's coped with the current resurgence, and of course we do have future ones to consider, although the drive for vaccination, I think, is certainly looks like, you know, that's the strategy the government wants, and perhaps it is going to reduce the risk further. And then ones that have increased recently, I thought were the risk about the community responding to council decisions. So that's number 8, and perhaps also relationships with key stakeholders. Just from the resident perceptions survey that we got, which I found really disappointing. A lot of reductions, quite significant reductions really, on some of those key questions, certainly about reputation and trust of council. And then other 2 that have been elevated would be the information management assets, like cyber attacks, as I raised in the insurance discussion, and the 3 waters reform, which I think is getting a little bit more uncertain. So interested in your comments on those ones.
Yeah, so I'll probably just make some generic comments, and I guess that the purpose of this is for you to reach an agreement in terms of those risk ratings. So these have obviously been discussed quite extensively by the executive team. So in regards to COVID, the sentiment is really around the level of uncertainty. There's still quite a high level of uncertainty in terms of the impact of it. And I guess when infometrics come and present, etc., that would be the sentiment that is portrayed there. So that's really the driver behind that one. Number 8, that's new, and that is in direct response to how the community feel about and respond in regards to some challenging conversations and discussions. And I guess that is hand in hand in regards to the resident perception survey results and the levers that we talked about there. So that risk has been added as a direct response to that. In terms of the information one, yes, is obviously and I know Richard, who's online here, will be presenting later on a cybersecurity update. Waipo is in a good position, but I guess when you look at the external environment, you know, the risks are increasing, and that's what we heard just before with the insurance presentation too. And 3 waters reform, I guess there's an element of, you know, and Dawn can jump in here too in regards to how it's rated. There's an element of, this is about being prepared for and planning rather than being ultimately in control of the outcome of that. So that's some of the sentiment and the discussion around how those risks were rated.
Thank you, Georgie. That's very helpful. We do hear Richard on cybersecurity a wee bit later, but Dawn, if there's anything you want to add about 3 waters at this stage.
No, I think George has captured that pretty well in terms of it's around our planning and responding rather than taking a front-facing role.
Thank you. Colleagues, anything else from people? Just a reflection from me, and I started looking at the heat map, and I wanted to reflect on what actually is our overall appetite, because in some sense where we want to end up with risk is indicative of the effort that we're asking Gary and the team to put in. So as a proxy, dare I say it, for a lot of the detail in the succeeding pages, I want to look at that heat map and just spend a couple of minutes with you just looking at that. So if folk have got that heat map, you can see that actually the majority of risks have probably a major effect with a range of possible through to almost certain. And we are clearly saying, because we've been asked, by the way, to adopt this report, we'll come back to those resolutions, that actually that isn't where we want to be as Waipa District Council. And in fact, when you look at the majority of the bottom line, which is, I think while there's a slight difference in the key, they're basically yellowish on that heat map. At the bottom, you'll see that we want to be comparatively conservative. And I don't use that word as a pejorative, but in risk terms, we do want to lower our risks substantially. So a critical question for us, is that the council we want to be, given these are our top risks? Okay, it's a question mark. Again, there's not a value judgment on that. It's a question, are we happy with that process? Because it will require, not only, as we've seen from the diagram, existing mitigations, but actually, dare I say it, spending money, if I can use an accountant's view of the world, spending money on additional mitigations to get it down to that point. It may be difficult for me to ask these questions of you in that sort of comprehensive whole basis. I do remind you that we do get the benefit to do deep dives. We have a chance to reflect more on these on an individual basis. But at this point, I just wanted to pause the conversation and say, is this the line of direction, which after all we worked out with KPMG, etc., and George and Jenny have helped us with, is this the line of direction that we are comfortable taking? Does it feel that that bottom line is where we should be aiming for? Which means generally, for any of these top risks, we are looking to minimise particularly the nature of the consequence or the impact, even if we can't necessarily deal with the likelihood. Any thoughts, questions, folk? Yes, Claire.
Yeah, thanks, Bruce. They're really great questions. And I'm looking at the heat map, and I agree that I'm not that happy with the residual risk for a number of them, but I'm being pragmatic. And I'm thinking too that it's the way that we portray the sort of the final point of the particular risk, because it is true that we're wearing a much higher risk for some items because we know we don't control the outcome. You know, whether that's COVID or whether it's the Three Waters reform or like the future of local government or whatever, you know, those ones. And I'm just wondering whether or not we could actually portray that in the diagram in some way, that it might be a different colour where it's a risk because we the position of it is because we know we don't have control over it. Yeah, because I do agree that to get the risk down into the green area could take a phenomenal amount of investment, which we're just not able to do really. I mean, if you like we could take that COVID one. Like I've seen the response that staff have been involved in recently for this latest outbreak, and I actually think they've done really well. And so that's why I thought perhaps the position, I think it's number 3, is it? Yeah, number three. Yeah, it is relatively high there, but I feel that the particular risks that we're facing, the ones we have control over to do with COVID, I think they're covered off really well. But there's always going to be a huge amount of uncertainty, yeah. And whether or not that could be sort of communicated in the chart in a different way, I'm not sure.
Thank you for that, Claire. That's a really good point. When we get to the risk appetite tables, we recognise that high often comes with a degree of lack of control on our part. We are indeed facing an external was about to say an existential risk. You might think that in terms of Three Waters reform and RMA reform and future local government, but we are facing an externally driven risk primarily, which is, after all, what any organisation has to face, be it local government or private sector. There are always external drivers, and these are impacting us. So, George, look, I pass that on. I mean, you've heard Claire's views, and it's perhaps not a bad one, that if it's something which has a higher uncontrollability, if I can call it that, because of its externality, it might be helpful for us to recognise that. I guess it does come through in the papers, but whether that's reflectable on a heat map, I'll let you, as gurus, think on that one. That's good. Are there any other questions? Look, I've just got an emergency, believe it or not. I'm just going to have to pop out for a couple of minutes. Could I ask Jim, could you just take over just for a couple of minutes? I'll be right back. Sorry about this.
Sorry, I can't get the hot water tap off the
As soon as I had my hand up to speak, I was struggling to find the mute button. Look, I was just going to make the comment, and I have in the past, that without an actual cost alongside of that heat chart, is really hard to make a call on how far down we're going to drive those top risks. And so I think getting back to Bruce's prompt is just how risk averse we want to be as a council. And it really is difficult to make that call without knowing what the actual costs are going to be. So, Bruce, I was just commenting on your question, I suppose, in terms of the heat map, and just without knowing what the cost is to achieve the reduction heading down to the green, into the yellow and green area, it's really hard to make that call. So there's nothing, it's a bit like the insurance, there's nothing like having a bill at the end of the day to actually sharpen your attention to just how far you want to drive those risks down. So yeah, I'm probably more inclined to take a higher risk than others, but without knowing what the implications are in terms of costs, it's really hard to say definitively. And I wonder, and the issue that's been raised already in terms of issue 3 on COVID, whether there's been a change, certainly in the first outbreak, if you want to call it that, civil defence emergency kicked in with all of those statutory controls. The second time round that we're in now, it's a different proposition altogether in terms of our, I suppose, costs and liability. And we are getting, I suppose, a lot more information on what the likely future reaction to a COVID outbreak will be, and whether we are actually going to continue to drive to get rid of COVID out of our community, or whether once we get 80, 90, whatever the figure is of the population vaccinated, we're just going to live with it, and it won't actually become an issue. So yeah, I just wonder, it might be too early at the moment, but certainly the COVID response may vary with increasing information. So that's just my comment on the heat maps anyway.
So sorry, through the chair. Sorry, I just did want to make a comment in regards.
You go, Georgie. Sorry, I realised I was muted there for a moment. Sorry about that.
Yeah, so just acknowledging your comment, Jim, around it is very difficult without a quantification next to it in terms of is it the right spot. I guess just a level of comfort that the mitigants that have been identified to manage these risks are within existing business plans. So I think that's a good thing in terms of tying the activity back to manage these risks in terms of what is planned for the next year, rather than all of it being on top of. So I just wanted to make that comment.
Gary, I just wanted to, as Chief Executive, if there's anything you want to do, comment on the heat map sort of general placement at this point.
No,
sorry, I was throwing you under, under the floor there, mate, but I just wondered whether there was something that you might have viewed at this stage, given our conversation.
no, look, the heat map's very useful because it helps the executive provide a degree of focus and understand the council's appetite. I mean, COVID is really interesting, isn't it, with the emergence of Delta and the way in which we've had to think about protecting staff and protecting the organisation by splitting up, key teams so they don't meet in person. So some of these things don't necessarily provide a marginal cost increase, but just the degree of focus that the executive team provides to those issues.
Thank you, Gary. And look, I asked a rhetorical question, so you should at least have the honour of my answer, which is actually, I think this is the right place to be. We can probably, and we should argue the toss on some being perhaps slightly higher than others, but we will do that in the course of the life of the committee through, as I said, our deep dives and various staff reports. But I would have thought as a whole, moving to that bottom, it's yellow at least on my diagram, those yellow dots in the green yellowy area is a probable position that we should be aiming for, given these are our top risks. There'll be a bunch of others that won't be necessarily there, but they're not ones that we've got a view on, and indeed probably because their consequence is of a lesser nature. So I actually think we are in the right position generally with, as you say, Georgie, both our existing mitigants and those that are within the work program. I mean, it's a judgment call that's actually where it gets us to, but it's not necessarily unreasonable. Yes, Jim? Yeah,
Bruce, I don't disagree with you, but if you just look at, and it's probably an extreme example, the health and safety one, risk number 9. And obviously, we don't want to take any risks with people's health and well-being. But so that's where we're wanting to head to from where we are now. That's the instruction that we've given. And from what George said, it's obviously the cost of achieving that is in our business plans. But as a committee and as a council, we don't know actually what the cost of the request is. So we've obviously said we want to drop it down into the green area, but without knowing what the implications of that request is.
Well, I think actually, if I can just get some correction, just to check, Jim, my reading, I understand that we're already there. If I have read my dots correctly, the blue dot says residual risk at target risk level. So we're saying that the level of investment that Waipa makes now has got us into the target area of well, really it's saying a health and safety matter is likely, but that it will be minor. Am I reading that right, George?
Yes, correct you are, and that was the subject of some discussion around the placement of that residual and target being in the same place.
Sorry, through the chair, just to illustrate that, if you go to top risk 9, which is one we've just Jim's just raised, the health and safety culture, you can see the current mitigations and controls, obviously quite an extensive list of those already in place, and then the table immediately below that, 3 additional mitigations, which are continual improvement, but not a huge amount of cost associated with those.
So look, I think, Jim, that does raise a good question, and I think, this is something to think about, because we've got a series of questions when we come to the deep dive review that Ken's done in the list of questions. And that maybe we don't emphasize enough about sort of the cost benefit process. Let's have a look at that as being a potential, at least, indicator that we might be interested in when we come to it. I think for the sake of both our time as a committee today and also in terms of the work that's in front of us, I think I feel comfortable, and I'm not sensing people are allergic to these being either A, our 14 top risks, or B, the relative positioning on it. What I do detect is that we want to manage it. to monitor it, and indeed to assess where is the state of that risk. And I think that's been particularly around the point you've raised, Claire, around COVID. Jim, you've raised a really good point about actually we do need to keep in our minds the extent of cost to achieve some of these things, albeit it may be the other way. Better look at it as actually, are we prepared to take some greater risk in some areas? So let's, unless there's a yes, Claire.
Yeah, so I guess what I'd like to see then is that George, you responded to I think the 4 items that I raised, the particular risks, but the one that we do have control over is managing the response of the community to council decisions. That's number 8. And so I would just say whether or not, is it appropriate for us to be reviewing the mitigants for that to see whether or not there should be something else being worked on just to respond, because I would not like to see that risk either deteriorate or like get worse, I guess, because I'm certain that having a good reputation with our community is one of the central things that we need to, to function well as a council. I'm happy to leave those other items because you said they're ones we don't have much control over, they're external risks, and I do agree with that.
If I could, sorry, Bruce, if we could maybe bring that discussion back into what Bruce was saying around the deep dive and the schedule of deep dive conversations and the questions that will be asked, and use that as a mechanism for timing and how that's discussed further.
Oh, yeah, I'd be really happy with that, actually. Yeah.
Okay. And Claire, it is quite appropriate. And I'm looking here at page 38 of 307. Which is the explanation of the failure, and I had noted here that the risk appetite was councillors in effect accepts a high targeted residual level. It is entirely within the bounds of this committee to make a decision to say is that acceptable or not. And I wanted to raise, I'm great on these rhetorical questions, aren't I? Are you guys happy with that? And you might say no, and I suspect you might be saying no. Question is what can be done about it, and what would it cost? And actually, what if we want a lower level? How would Gary be able to manage this? And I mean, this is the value of the deep dive discussions. Another council, one of my commitments, councillors wanted a particular risk emphasised, and the chief executive to say, well, that's fine, I can do that, but it's going to divert resources, and we have to have that discussion as well. I think that's where I think we are agreeing. This sits here clear, but we do agree that actually the deep dives now all of a sudden become that much more real for us, if I can call it that, because when we taken Ken's good paper, and I know I'm blending my agenda all over the place, it's going to be critical that we have this page in front of us and we say, yes, we're happy with that residual risk at the end of the page. Okay, if we do that, are there any other burning questions then in terms of, and we really haven't got to the risk appetite part, other than we have been trying to address risk appetite in the round, the generality in the way I've raised it. Are there other questions people would like to raise at this point on either the top 14 or indeed the risk appetite paper at this point? Well, I feel like we have done it justice, but not had enough time to do it even more justice, George and Jenny. So let's just move to those recommendations. But as we do, because I'm going backwards in my my agenda papers, just notice the risk network, which is the what do you call that? The emitters and the receiver diagram, whatever we call it. It's on page 30. That's a very valuable one to have, by the way, in our minds, which is that none of our risks generally stand in splendid isolation. We push one, something else gets affected, or something happens in one, it tends to have an effect somewhere else. So I presume in this diagram, George, COVID-19, growth, and the future of local government are the biggies. Am I right in saying that?
Yes, you are. I guess probably one of the key things in that diagram is to look at is where the blue lines are and the cluster.
Okay.
And when you're looking at something that is a receiver and an emitter as well, so I think looking in that cluster, they're all very interrelated. When you look at COVID, that is very important too in terms of it's emitting everywhere.
Okay, so the size of the circles?
Sorry, I'm just trying to zoom in here. So the size of the circle is the inherent risk, from what I understand. So if it's a real big one, it's quite big. The middle of it is the target in terms of where we're wanting to go.
Okay, the wee rings around it. Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
So,
anyway, I think there's a lot more to explore on that diagram. We haven't got time today, to be perfectly honest, but the key point is interrelationship, and thank you for pointing out the key thing inside this for the members, which is look at the ones with the blue lines.
Yeah.
And actually, I agree. So that's connecting staff capacity, capability, key stakeholder relationships, delivery of the capital program, and the iwi mana whenua partnership. Those are the four that cluster together. Is that what you're saying, George?
Yes, yeah, very interrelated in terms of the effect on each other.
Brilliant. That's really great to see. Okay, can we move to the recommendations, please, which are on page 23? And again, we're saying the annual refresh be received. Thank you, Jenny, for your hard yards on this one. The top risks, that's the 14 of them, be approved. And I think we are saying that. And the risk appetite statement be approved. And I think we can do that again on the basis that we really have almost dealt with Ken's paper, but not quite, that we're going to go into the deep dives as well, which gives us the ability to have that continual review along with Jenny's quarterly update. So on that basis, I'm going to move from the chair that all these three motions. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Roger. Appreciate your help. I'll put the motions, all three, and then all those in favour, please say aye.
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 Those against? It's carried. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Right. We could then move to, where are we up to? We're up to the risk management update. And again, it's going to be either George or Jenny. I don't know who's speaking first.
Hi, so yep, that's me. So we're going to take the report as read, but there are some highlights that we wanted to make. Obviously, the quarter has been dominated by the COVID response in regards to the Delta variant, and that will have flow-on effects to the work program. But overall, we just wanted to make comment that it has been a relatively smooth process this time, and I think that's from all the great planning that staff have done across the organisation and the lessons that have been learnt from the last round. The report references the policy rationalisation project, which is currently with the organisational charter just being finalised. And one of the things with that project is looking at what our policy templates look like for our internal policies. And we are currently working on the risk and compliance policy using that new format to bring to ARC next time. There's reference in here to a framework for managing threats and aggressive customers, looking to take a holistic approach and a framework approach to that piece of work, and making sure that we have all the dots joined so that staff can easily understand how things fit together. You'll also see in the appendix that we have the scope of the internal audit of Council's project and program practices there, and happy to take comment on that scope. That audit will be commencing shortly. And then the quarterly risk report has got the top risks that you just went through. So they've been refreshed, and you'll note the arrow indicating a trend upwards in risks associated with COVID recovery in the current environment. So they're, I guess, the key points to highlight there.
Thank you, George. That's a tremendous lead for us. Thank you, Claire.
Thanks, George. So just three comments, really. The first one is the policy rationalisation project. That's on page 75 of our agenda. The middle paragraph says that the organisational charter currently in process has been developed and tested with staff. I was just interested in any feedback, actually, because, you know, like to rationalise all those policies would be pretty amazing. And you're taking that values approach. Yeah. And do you have any feedback from people that were involved in it, how they're finding it?
So it hasn't been finalised. So we have a working group that it's been tested with, and we've got it to a nearly finalised place. There's been a number of iterations through that process with staff, and the general consensus across the working group is, and from the executive team as well, and Gary can contribute if he would like, is that it reinforces the values work and really provides that links what we expect in regards to our work practices back to our values. So it's really another iteration of reinforcing the values work across the organisation. And then it forms a basis to link those policies. So the policies aren't sitting out there on their own, they're linked back to this is how we work. The next phase is we're actually going to take a completely fresh group of staff that haven't been involved in developing the charter and just do a bit of a workshop and a test with them to make sure that it resonates, that the language is right, etc.
Well, I was hoping to hear that, and so I guess it'd be good if in a future report that we do hear some feedback from those involved, that perhaps it makes it a lot easier to get the staff get their head around the details, the intent of the policy, and so that they can rely more on the values and know that they're doing the right thing anyway, basically. I think that's the whole idea, isn't it? That it simplifies things and makes everything a lot more coherent. Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely the intent, to make them palatable, aligned with the values, the values help inform decision making.
Yeah, cool. And the second thing I had was on the quarterly risk management report page. So I think that's 79. And really, I really like the layout of it. But in the bottom right-hand corner now, there's a little key about emitter risk and receiver risk. And I just thought it'd be really helpful if the top risks, which is the panel above it, if there's some sort of notation to indicate whether the risk was emitter or receiver, because it's all very well to have the key, but there's no way to know which ones they are. If you know, I mean, obviously we have that other diagram, but that's in a different place. Yeah, and so I just thought it'd be helpful if we did have that, so that we're conscious of those, because we've emphasised already the relationship that they have with the overall risk. And then lastly, just a really big thumbs up. Well done for the threat and response framework. That's on page 82, I think, because I really loved it. It sets it out, but it's really succinct. I guess what I liked was the resources panel on the right-hand side, so that people, if you want to go drill down a bit deeper, you can just click on it, I presume, and you get to the and it's a logical progression, how it's all going to work through. So yeah, I just think well done. It looked really great.
I suspect we're all going to be saying the same things. So we've got folk, so well done. Are there other questions for George, please? Just a couple from me, if that's okay. I was interested, George, again, I'm back actually in your paper, where you indicated that with COVID-19, the transition essentially has been managed smoothly with resilience by staff. Can I be honest, around the sector, there is actually evidence of a reasonable amount of stress on staff with this lockdown. We full steam into it, knowing that we could do it. And there seems to be some challenges coming out from elsewhere, and with staff wellbeing in terms of working from home. You can see me race off an emergency, where the blend of family life and work life is becoming harder to balance. And also we've had some discussion, particularly for mums and dads with younger children, and the problems of a partner being stuck away in a room, etc. Clearly with a level of stress with it. I wondered whether great people moved in and we're asserting here resilience. I was wondering really how it is going for staff. I'm not saying I disagree with what you've written here, so I should be careful what I'm saying, but I'm just wondering as we go on, how are staff faring?
I guess Gary can jump in here too. I guess my comment around resilience was everybody knew what they needed to do, and they did it very quickly. I do agree that around the crisis management team, there is a discussion about how we support staff wellbeing and mental health. And yes, it has been identified as a challenge. And from what I understand, it is a challenge across all councils at the moment with the level of uncertainty, and there is a level of COVID fatigue. So one of the big focuses of the HR team throughout this one is around how we can support staff through the process as it continues on. But Gary, I don't know if you've got anything else to say about that.
No, probably nothing else, George, other than to say that I think you're right on the money. I mean, the systems and processes all work really well, but I think across the sector and probably across the country generally, people are suffering a lot more stress. It seems to be the workload during lockdown, especially from a policy email type perspective. People are working really big hours, and they do seem to be under a bit more stress. It's not. I was going to say it's not as much fun as it was last time. But last time there was.
I think you're right, Gary. It was novel last time, whereas this time it's as if business is cranked up rather than taking a pause.
Yeah, and so last time we had a council staff, lockdown Facebook page. It was of their making, but there was a lot of sharing good stories, and there's not so much of that. It's just doing the business, and together with trying to manage a really big capital works program and the reform agenda in local government. It's driving lots of stresses. People are uncertain about their future. So I agree with you. Without having done a staff survey, I think that folks are finding this lockdown a lot more stressful.
It raises questions of the obvious question, Gary, and maybe you want to talk about this in PX, but is there anything we can do?
I think as an executive, we need to lead the way and ensure that people aren't working excessive hours and responding to emails at late hours and those sorts of things. But for me, it's about setting the tone from the top and making that clear in blogs and things like that I do every Friday.
Yeah, I'd be keen just that we do that. What is another term I've heard? Lockdown hangover. People know that they can't do everything at home in the way that you would at work, and there's some of them are getting quite, not scared's the wrong word, but just toting up what's going to have to happen when they get back to work. So there are some issues there. So look, that's fine. Thank you for that, Gary. I would perhaps caution's the wrong word, but I'd be interested to see how it could be worrying to see how this is affecting people, and I would encourage you to keep that in front of your mind.
Certainly, Bruce. And just one more thing. It's about making it fine for people to push back when they're overloaded, and there is a bit of that going on. Yeah. I mean, I've heard some stories where people managers, line managers have realised that actually you just got to accept that, particularly say a dad or a mum with young children just has to have 2 or 3 hours off a day just to be able to contribute to home rather than being full time, or actually another council where they've recognised 15 of their staff are just not the sort of people who are able to work easily at home. And now in lockdown 2, this is clearly not Auckland, in lockdown 2, they've been able to make certain they're the people that are prioritised to be able to be back at work in a place where they can be productive and feel safe. It's actually those sort of nuanced knowledge of actually how staff are operating. Just the other thing that I noted there was a real risk, and it cropped up in my mind because it's happened elsewhere, is the privacy breach, which we are characterising as minor, and I appreciate that, and I think probably this is on a minor scale compared to the one that we've had to deal with in another committee just recently. Is there any learning out of this one? Anybody help me there? Gary, George, somebody? Obviously an unwanted, and I'm sure
with best of intent. Never anticipated would ever happen,
No.
but it has.
Yeah, and I think it's just equality, just ensuring that the quality checks are in place. We have two council privacy officers who are very active in ensuring that we're meeting our obligations under the Privacy Act. So it's just a learning in terms of quality management, and all the necessary actions were taken after the breach was identified. Diana, who is presenting later in the agenda, may also be able to talk to it if there are any further questions.
Yes, okay, appreciate that.
So if I could just add, Bruce, that we had a very good training session with staff, particularly dealing with those tensions that exist between the Privacy Act and the Local Government Official Information and Meetings Act. Yeah. There are some tensions there, but Diana and one other, I think it was Joe, ran a very good session with staff on the tensions between those two pieces of legislation.
I know that we should never make excuses, but I suspect this is something that most councils will always run a risk on, which cannot be eliminated. So I understand that, and Gary can just compliment the council for being transparent in this paper. That it's faced a breach and what it's done about it. I think that's actually really important. Remembering the Lagoima is not to avoid embarrassment for us, even if it's uncomfortable, but actually to be transparent. So well done, appreciate that. Look, there are some other questions, but I think in the case of that, I will keep moving on and wanted to agree with Claire about the threat and response framework. Love a diagram, best way to get a paper. It's brilliant. And I just wondered if we could just check whether there are any comments on the proposed piece of work by KPMG, essentially around a framework, and is the framework working effectively in terms of project and management and governance review. Can I take it you've agreed this all makes sense to you? It's really just a case of getting us to say go.
Yes, that's correct, Chair. So management and staff have had a look at this and are pretty comfortable with it. It's only come through just as recently as I think about the middle part of last week. So look, we just thought we'd take this opportunity to test it with the committee before we sign and return.
Ken, the only question I had the only observation I had was, look, I appreciate this is coming from a top-down approach. It's got that overall view, the framework view, and is the framework being used effectively? I think one of the things that I am noting in procurement, and I appreciate this is project management, but it's not unallied to procurement, is speed to market, efficiency, having all the tools in the toolbox in our procurement strategy to enable us to in the current environment, where the supply chain is actually a significant risk, it's probably the biggest risk that everybody talks about at the moment. Do we have within the framework, the appropriate toolbox to be efficient in the way in which we go about not just our projects, but obviously the key part of it, how we procure and enable. Now, that might be making it out too further, but perhaps what I'd like to suggest, if there are any comments or observations which flow from doing this effective framework view, I think it would be good if we capture those. Just a thought from me. I don't have to, it's a big piece of work, I can see from the price. I don't want us to necessarily make this bigger than Ben here, but I'd like to just suggest to Benita that if there were observations that she thought, I wonder whether that's actually efficient or whether they could be doing something different that enables the project to go effectively. I'd appreciate these comments.
Cool. Right. Okay. Well, we'll capture that, Chair, and talk to KPMG about that.
Take it, we probably are keen to all move on. I don't see anybody else's hands up. Can we please move to the recommendation then, please, on page 74 of 307, which is that the report, thank you, Jenny, be received. I'll move that. Do I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Jim. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against? It's carried. Thank you. Right. We can move on then, please, to our next item. How are we going? I don't know. I suspect I'm going to be stressed to try and actually make up time, but we'll see how we go. Business resilience update. And again, it's either going to be George or Jenny leading us off, please.
Okay, so we'll take the report as read. There's just a couple of points. So this is a significant milestone, I guess, in the improvement program. So we've completed a summary business impact analysis across the full organisation. And as a consequence of that, we have developed the organisation business continuity plan, which is actually in an appendix on the agenda. You'll see in the plan, it takes a scenario-based approach. It looks at all the critical functions, people, etc., across the organisation. And what the next phase of the project is, that information is then used by the different departments to develop their or refresh their own business continuity plans. So that's just, I guess, in terms of an update on how the improvement program is going. We've now reached a major milestone that's been completed, and we're now moving on to the next phase, which is generation of the business continuity plans.
Thank you, Georgia. It certainly is a very impressive piece of work as I scrolled through it. So congratulations to you and the team for getting there. Folk, can I can I open it up for questions for George and Jenny at this stage? Yes, Claire.
Thanks, George. And now I agree with Bruce. It looks like you've got it all really well set out. The only comment I have actually is the colours that are used on page 137 or page 44 of the report, you know, with the criticality of human resources. So you've got essential in yellow, important, which is lower down, in orange, and non-essential in green. And this is a different hierarchy to the other colours that are in our agenda for other reports, where I would have expected important to be yellow and essential to be amber or orange. So when I first read through it, I didn't read the key, and I was looking at I suppose what was the challenge, and I just automatically gravitated to the amber. And it was a bit of a surprise to learn that it's actually the yellow ones that are the most critical. So that's all.
Yeah, no, thanks, Claire. It's actually a really good point. So something we've overlooked, so we'll have a look at that.
Yeah, and then also in the appendices, like Appendix 3, and that's on, I think it's page, I'm sorry about this, I haven't got good lighting in my room when I'm on a Zoom. I think it's page 153 of the agenda. You've got the criticality rating 1 to 5, and then underneath it, you've got the table, but the ratings aren't actually in the table. So perhaps that's something that's going to be done as part of the exercise. And I think
so sorry to interrupt you, Claire.
Yeah, no, that's right.
The criticality of resources, the ones in the table are only the ones that are 4 or 5.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah. Oh, okay. So
we can make that a lot clearer. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, and I think there was another appendix of a similar nature. Yeah. Okay, cool. But thanks. But I can see that you've done heaps of work, and it looks like it's just going to be a massive machine that rolls out and does what it's meant to do. Thanks.
Any other questions for folk here, please? It seems like we're not giving enough credit to what clearly I think we are agreeing, George, is a pretty solid piece of work. Just a couple of queries from me. From the smaller to the bigger one, I'm just looking at the page 123, where the prioritised service and functions. This is a really interesting read, actually, for somebody who doesn't have to get into the depths of this. This was a very interesting read, and I agree, Claire. Very interesting to see, you know, while I'm sure the most essential person is the accountant. But anyway, that's just my my background bias. Ken, you're laughing, I hope. Can I just check, in terms of that page, 0.125, what's that in terms of a normal day? Is that about an hour? It says there, for instance, if you look at community services, library manager, aggressive or difficult people, you've got 0.125 of an RTO, which is a day. I was just checking what that was in terms of response time. It's quite granular, and there are quite a number of differences in terms of times right throughout the document.
I might ask, so this is Jenny's amazing work, and she can get absolutely full credit for this paper. Jenny,
sorry, Jenny, you can see as an accountant looking at this and trying to work out what 0.125 is.
Can you help us with this one?
So when I used a template that had gone through a few other councils that I think originated in Wellington City Council, and we basically looked at a 1 hour, 4 hour, 1 day, 2 day, and the 0.125 is 1 hour. So it's really indicating immediate response.
Yeah, good. That's what I figured. Thank you. And that's actually was quite valuable for me to, as I just flicked my eye through the graphs here, to work out essentially what we saw as essential to have to get to respond to. So I do appreciate that. One of the other ones that interested me was, and perhaps I need to look at the LTP better, is actually the funding risk, which again, I was going on based right at the start on colour, which actually I think we have got high. In terms of business continuity, are we, if council failed to source funding or was financially unstable, then services would be compromised, and we've got that as a high risk. I take it, yes, the inherent risk rating is that. Now, that may not be the residual. Perhaps somebody could just help me understand that. I wondered whether, that suggested a level of restriction for us. Do we feel that? Ken, perhaps you have a view?
You're on mute, Ken.
There you go. I've done it for the first and hopefully the last time in this meeting. Hey, Bruce. Sorry, I did hear you there, but have you got a page reference for?
Oh yes, page 90 of 307.
Okay.
It's got the organisational risk scenarios, and look, I agree. If we ran out of funding, we would be challenged. My critical question is, what do we think our current status is?
Yeah. So look, I guess so. What we're saying it's a high risk there. Yeah, I mean, yeah. So look, it's not. It's not something that keeps me awake at night. Just in the current circumstances. I think it's fair enough to say that during the LTP process, we did notice certainly we've got less reserves than what we've had in the past. So there's definitely some risks in that space in regard to funding our activities. A loss of funding would have have more significant impact when we perhaps don't have the reserve balances that in the past we've been able to draw on. But look, it's not it's not an immediate and pressing need. It's just something that we need to need to keep a certain amount of focus on.
That's comfortable. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, through the chair. Just too, it's also aligned with our top risks and the ratings that we have on them. So the two are very much aligned.
I always wondered whether the top risk we were slightly blending two things, which is what is the economic status of our community versus what's the actual balance sheet of the council. They're not unrelated, by the way. I get that, but I think actually we've got their funding as a theme which covers at least a couple of different risks. So I do take on board the point that actually, particularly as we've been talking COVID, that actually there is a risk to the underlying community wealth, if you will, which ultimately has an impact on us and our ability to raise funding. So look, I get that. Yeah, surely. Claire, I heard yes, but I think Claire, you got your hand up.
Oh yeah, well, another aspect of that funding risk is that a number of our projects in the LTP depend on asset sales of council property.
Notice that.
Yeah, and so and certainly John Miles has said, that is a risk, and because some of those projects we would want to progress in year one, if the sales don't eventuate, it will mean that we'll be saying to our community we won't be doing those projects this year. So yeah, there is much more risk in that than we've had previously in our near-term projects.
Great. And from the sublime to the ridiculous, George and Jenny, I loved on page 89 to 307 under risk management, you had a couple of dice. Wondering if risk management was about rolling dice, although I noticed we've come up with 666, so it must be pretty darn good one way or the other. So given I've said that, we must be near the end of the paper unless folk have other questions. Are there any other final questions before I look to the resolution? There isn't. Again, I'd like to move this motion, but with my endorsement for what is clearly the very hard yards that you've put into. Actually, what I have to say is the most comprehensive business continuity planning that I've seen. So well done, guys. And I appreciate that. So I'm more than happy to move it. Do I have a seconder, please, that we receive this report? Thank you, Claire. I saw your hand first. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
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 Those against? It's carried. Hey, thank you for that. Right, if we can move on. How are we going? We've got half an hour to go before lunch. If we could move then on to the cyber security. And Richard, I think you've been probably waiting there very patiently. Thank you. I presume we open up and leave you to address your paper, please.
Thanks, Bruce, and good morning. So I'll take the report as read, but would summarise key points. So we're using SAM for Compliance as a framework to report cybersecurity conformance to good practice. The framework allows benchmarking against peer organisations with similar complexity and risk profiles. And it's been a really helpful tool for managing tasks and monitoring progress. There's been some additional capacity freed up within the IT team to focus on cybersecurity improvements. This is really helping keep a focus on security mitigants. We're collaborating with other councils and we've established a technical working group, and this group has jointly developed a cybersecurity incident response plan and virtual response team with supporting processes, and this would be used by our CMT in response to a cyber event. And internally, staff are participating in online cybersecurity awareness training, and we're seeing a positive result in testing behaviours. So staff are becoming aware of suspicious activity and reporting it and or not following it. And all this work is kind of ongoing in combination with other organisational priorities. So I guess that's the summary of the report. And are there any kind of questions?
Thanks, Richard. Good point. Okay, do people like to raise questions with Richard about this? It's an area that we've talked about under insurance, which clearly has been on our minds. So I just wonder, yes, Claire.
Oh, well, Richard, I just want to say well done actually for the initiative to be working with the other IT managers in local government, actually, because I think it's a complex area, isn't it? And I've seen like banks have been the subject of these disruption of service or denial of service attacks recently as well, and they were saying really that you've got to have people that have got that depth of knowledge, that have the skills to understand how to manage these risks. So I presume by being part of that larger sector group that you feel that council will be able to access that level of expertise that's needed.
I do. We have a bigger pool of resourcing, and with some of the larger councils that have more technical expertise we can draw on. So it's going to be very helpful if we need it.
And I really like the framework that, it's a really thorough one, isn't it? And covers off all the different aspects, and then the way it's portrayed with that web diagram at the end, so you can see how council stacks up against the industry average or the sector average at least. So it's a good guide to understand where to focus to improve.
Yes, we found that very useful from a technical delivery point of view and from a reporting point of view.
So as the manager, do you feel that the risks that you're having to live with are sort of being managed in a more comprehensive way? Like, do you feel you get a bit more, I suppose, peace of mind? Or is it still, do you still feel it's still pretty risky?
I think there's risk there, but I think the organisation's really acknowledged and accepted it, and are pretty focused on trying to mitigate, with controls and general awareness. So I'm reasonably comfortable with the approach the organisation has toward cyber risk.
Yeah, cool. Thank you.
Richard, I just wondered what you thought was going to be the area that you're looking to get most gain in over the next quarter.
So we've got three kind of key areas. One is around cloud software, and this is making sure that we control where our information is stored. So we'll be focusing on a control to manage the use of web-based software. One is around an initiative we've got called Everything in Its Place, and this is really about understanding where our information is stored and educating staff on where they need to be saving and keeping their information to ensure privacy and confidentiality. And then there'll be some additional checks we put into staff recruitment to ensure we're checking for cyber. We're asking cyber related questions when we employ people.
Yeah, okay. One question I just had looking at the spotter diagram was around particularly managing essentially access and control. It's relative because it's probably the only point where the benchmark does actually get out beyond where we're at. Access controls have been probably pretty top, well, have been a strong emphasis for a while. Can you comment on developments there, where you hope to go?
So I won't talk on specific controls, but we have put in place additional security controls around access management. So we're pretty comfortable that we've got a good level of access management, particularly if you're external to the organisation. So we leverage cloud software extensively, and we need to have good controls around that. So it will be really around compliance and reporting on access control. This is in things like Microsoft Office 365 and technology on cloud. So it's really around reporting and conformance. So ensuring we're tracking who's accessing systems and ensuring that it's appropriate.
And just tell me, I mean, I think it's probably obvious, but I'd like to sometimes ask the obvious question. So when I look at the conformance status and it says we're at 68.59%, how do you describe that to a lay person like me? What does that mean?
Well, I think it's getting toward being mature. If 100% is where we want to be, we're moving toward that target. I guess in terms of the controls, to get to 100%, it gets harder and harder. So the controls we've implemented have been perhaps what we call the lower hanging fruit. And then as we move into the maturity scale, they get harder to implement, or they require more resourcing or are slightly more complex. So the kind of the last 20% will be harder than the first 60%.
Yeah, okay, no, I appreciate that. Look, and certainly, as a committee, we've got some assurance relative to your peers where we stand on this, so that's useful. Folk, any other questions for Richard at this stage on this report? None. Let's move to the recommendation, which is that we receive Richard's report. Thank you, Richard, for this. Topical for us to keep in our heads at this stage. Do I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Jim. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against? It's carried. Thank you very much. Thank you, Richard. Appreciate that. That's very helpful.
Thanks, bye.
Right, I've got to the end of my first page of my agenda. That's not too bad, is it? Can we? Where are we at? Oh, yeah, we're making up time. Not that it should be speed that is necessary to mind here. Dawn, asset management planning audit improvement program. Ooh, we're back into asset management planning. It's great. Thank you, Dawn. In your hands.
Absolutely, kia ora koutou. Just further to my report, I guess a couple of key highlights that, and achievements that the teams have made is around the development and endorsement of the activity management framework and our work program. So that's, as I say, it's been a very inclusive process that's involved interviewing staff to get that input. But we've got a very clear work plan moving forward. So as I say, it's been a key highlight. And as indicated in the report, the next sort of steps are looking at our activity management policy, and that work's just kicking off at the moment, and then moving through to the development of our strategic activity management plan. So that is a piece of work that we're going to be bringing in some external resource to help us with, to get that well shaped up, but very much connecting to the great skills and knowledge that we've got inside the organisation. Another quick update in terms of, you will have seen that we've completed the work on the roadmap in terms of our organisation moving to be a strategy-led organisation, which is a really cool aspiration to have and something that we've achieving across the board, but in this case particularly. So yeah, it's really cool. We've got that framework in place, and whilst the content within it, in terms of as we move through into our next LTP, we'll re-look at some of those components. We've got the framework there that's locked in. So as I say, that's again something to celebrate in terms of achievements. One other further item I just wanted to touch on. So yet to commence, and I know this has been a sort of question from this particular committee in the past, is around our resourcing around activity management. And it's a matter of as an organisation now, we're obviously doing looking at our resourcing across a number of areas, looking at future of local government and those sorts of things. So rather than doing a separate piece of work, we're waiting and seeing how this is going to fit into that wider program of what is the right size business for what that future holds for Waipaha District. So that one's just sitting there waiting at the moment. And the other item around when KPMG came in and did the audit and looked particularly at our operational contracts in our waters delivery area, that was prior to the restructure of our waters team, and we had only just moved into an external sort of formal contract around our stormwater sort of delivery and management, rather than more of an ad hoc process previously. So whilst we have yet to commence in there, we've certainly done a lot of work in that space, and anecdotally, I've got some really cool feedback in terms of not only we a lot better at vesting our stormwater assets that are coming into us, our management and administration functions, but that with resourcing more appropriately within the waters team, we are managing that contract of delivery really, really well. So the piece of work that we have yet to commence is a more formal sort of benefit realisation, I guess, from all of those things, which I think is worth doing, but it's one of those things that we're pushing back on just at the moment. And I certainly recognise the earlier conversation in terms of workload challenges that many of our teams are facing. And as much as I think that one's a really cool piece of work to do, anecdotally, I'm not seeing any concerns. So therefore, I think it's a nice to have piece of work. So we just haven't started on that one as yet. So we're in a really exciting phase. As I say, the policy document and our SAMP are the next sort of key bits of work. And we have a timeline such to shape them up that we're then moving into early 2022 with our activity management plans, moving through to the next LTP. So yeah, that's sort of the report summary and highlights, but yeah, welcome any questions if the committee have any.
Thank you, Dawn, and what a good timely reminder that we should celebrate things that actually are achieved rather than just looking for the holes. So well done, and congratulations to your team for things that you are able to celebrate. That's tremendous. Could I invite committee members? Claire, you're first up.
Yeah, thanks, Dawn. And it's really great to hear such a positive report, because I actually, when I read this, I thought, gosh, this is such a difficult, like large and involved sort of process and project that you're got to get under, I suppose, to see it progressed, I guess, because I do see it as a really big piece of work and probably something that hasn't had a lot of attention, you know, in the various activities. The questions I have is, I noticed that ISO 55,000 asset management standards, and there's also the International Infrastructure Management Manual, that I understand that alignment with those sort of, I don't know, industry standards, I guess, is one of the important goals. And yet I didn't see it, those, certainly the ISO one, referenced very much in the policy documents or the project documents. And I wasn't sure how relevant it was. Like, is there much difference between what council's doing at the moment and that ISO standard?
They're not referenced as such, because we've made quite a deliberate decision that we're not going to move through to being sort of externally audited or certified under the ISO standard. But very much they are used as reference documents in terms of informing things like our work plan. What does best practice look like? So they've certainly been utilised in that sort of area. Are they going to change what we do? Yes, but it's going to be different in different activities, because we've got different levels of maturity sitting in each of the activities. So in some areas we've got high levels of maturity, and they've already a long way down that sort of process of implementing good practice. In other areas, you know, we're still developing up how we describe our assets and some of our inventory to get a more consistent sort of thing. So very disparate, I guess, across their varied activities, but certainly using those to build what we need to do.
Okay, and that's great. And then there's the strategic AMP, which I think is activity management plan. Yeah. It's difficult when you've got activity management plan and asset management plans with the same initials. So I wasn't sure the role of the strategic AMP, because in a way I would have thought, if it's a generic one, wouldn't it make sense to make sure that you've got that, you know, nailed before worrying about getting the individual AMPs done? So I was just wanting a bit of clarity around how you see the SAMP fitting in, and so the correct order that it should be completed in.
And I guess ultimately there is a bit of iteration between them, is that the SAMP becomes the place where we have all of that organisationally wide consistent information, that then the AMPs are the story of how infrastructure responds to that. So rather than embedding them in each of the activity management plans as we do now, is bringing them to one place. It means that our AMPs are able to be much more streamlined and tell a very focused infrastructure activity story around that activity, rather than maybe getting bogged down in some of that other detail.
Yeah. So I guess the aim is, as you said, streamlining and reducing duplication and stuff like that. Yeah. Okay. So, but you're leaving that to a later time. You're not going to get that done in the earlier pieces. I don't know. I mean, I do see it's down as in progress, but as I got through the agenda item, it seemed that the individual AMPs were going to be the focus.
Oh, the components of it. So at the moment, the key focus in our AMP sort of cycle is our improvement plans. So make sure that all of those commitments we've made to improving our activities are underway. But so to me, I guess our 3-year cycle doesn't stop and start. You know, there's always work that's happening within that improvement activity.
Yeah. Okay. Oh no, thanks. That's a really good clarification. And I totally agree with you about the Three Waters reform. We can see it's coming, and why spend a lot of resource trying to get it sorted out when we know that there's likely to change, or hopefully actually a standard is going to be provided that might also have software with it or something, and so we can just hook into that. Yeah, and really pleased to see that some more resourcing is in line, to help get some progress in this area. So thanks.
Any other questions for Dawn, please? Could I just check there, Dawn, just the issue about resourcing, because you got one of my questions already out, thank you, which was the whole workstream 5, asset management resourcing and capability, which I think I indicated, if I heard it correctly, is deliberately withheld because there is ultimately the issue of what does the future look like for us. And yet when I looked at then, where are we? Workstream 2, asset management maturity. We were dealing with address improvement plan weaknesses, etc., which is in progress. You've got a paragraph that says anticipate that progress against the AMP improvement plans will be limited until appropriate resourcing is secured to enable their delivery. Now, the two might not be the same, so I don't want to necessarily blend the two. Do we have a resourcing issue though at this stage?
In some activities, absolutely, and I think in our property area, it's one key one where we are looking at a movement to a new system, and to do that appropriately, it absolutely needs the right level of resourcing. But it's a little chicken and eggish until we've kind of got the system and know what that is needing. We can't sort of make sure we've got the right people and the right skill sets and the like. So I think that is one area I think where we absolutely recognise the need, but the catalyst isn't quite here. Also online, we've got Neil Taylor, our council planning analyst, and he may have some thoughts because he works very closely with our AMP writers in terms of this particular area.
Brilliant, Neil. Welcome to the meeting. It looks like the light coming over the ridge.
Well, good morning. It's afternoon hour. So in terms of AMP improvements, there are some limitations caused by resourcing. What we tend to have is individuals who have a role that's part around the activity management planning and a part around BAU, and very often your BAU will start taking over because obviously it's quite reactive, and they tend to lack the ability to focus enough on some of the AMP improvement items. So yes, there is some resourcing limitations, and it does vary across from unit to unit.
Thank you, Neil. Appreciate that.
Right.
And I look, we're hearing about the contingencies of running an organisation, Dawn, that you will always face. Colour coding, I'm not quite certain, but the colour coding here, is this something that's a big worry for the moment? I'm sensing that actually, you're well aware of where the gaps are, you're well aware of actually how you want to approach it. So it's not as if this is something that's keeping you unduly awake at night.
No, I think the greater risk is if we went in isolation of a wider organisational understanding in terms of priorities.
Thank you, appreciate that. And look, one other just slight question. It's the other one of the yet to be commenced, which is to establish a simple but robust data model for all asset classes. What does that quite mean? We're not talking about metadata here by any chance, are we?
Yes.
We are, okay. Cool.
Oh, right. Sorry, Neil, you might like to add some more weight to that, Bones.
No, you're right. It is around metadata and the data standards we're using. It would require it's quite resource hungry because you've really got to get somebody down into the detail, which is why it's not yet commenced. It's planned for future once we've got our resourcing organised, because we would struggle to do it, I think, meaningfully with the current resources in a reasonable time frame.
We aren't able to beg, borrow, or steal off somebody else, are we?
Also, yeah, exactly what I was going to comment on through the chair is the Waikato LAS are currently doing an investigation into a centre of expertise for activity management across the Waikato region, and we're expecting that type of activity is something that will come up across the wider region, and therefore it makes sense for us to be connected into that piece of work rather than commencing something independently.
Great, yeah. Actually, I wonder whether I've seen it somewhere else in some of my responsibilities, Dawn, but that's great. By the way, for the matter of record, I'm not suggesting, by the way, we steal. It's a phrase, by the way. But actually, there we go. I better stop digging myself into a hole. Are there any other questions for Dawn or for Neil at this stage, guys? There being none, let's go to the recommendation, which is, again, that we receive the report. Again, Dawn, thank you for the detail with which you addressed us, and Neil for your work too. We do wish you well. It's such a key part of our total organisation. It's great to see the progress. I'll move this that we receive it. Could I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Claire. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against? Carried. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Right, I can see we have a couple of guests here, and I suspect they would like us to deal with them quickly, Leon. More importantly, perhaps we could deal with them before we go to our lunch break, because I suspect after that, after dealing with our item on audit fees, Leon, you folk would be keen to get back to the hard yards of the work that you're doing. So with the leave of the committee, but without a motion, I propose that we just jump ahead and we go to item 13, which is the audit fees for the current audit and the next year's audit, which is the final 2 years of the current engagement with Leon. So Ken, could I suggest you lead off, and then Leon, very happy to take your comments.
Yes, Chair, very, very happy to do that. So so look, it's a very brief paper that I put into the agenda just to cover off on the audit fee letter received from Leon and Liz recently in regard to audit fees. Okay, so so look, I guess I thought the table that I put there on the first page could be helpful. So these are reasonably significant audit fee increases that we are talking about. So compared to the audit fee that was set for last year's audit, 2019-20, a fee of 138,000. What we're talking about is back-to-back increases of around 8.9%. So so fairly significant, but I guess not unexpected. Given that there was an additional fee charged last year, and given that we've actually heard from not only Leon and Liz, but also from the Auditor General himself about his concerns about under recovery of fees in the sector. So so no great surprise that that auditors looking for, I guess what is a correction in the audit fee space. The letter also points out significant staff salary type cost increases, and again no surprise, because COVID, we understand, has turned the world upside down for the auditing profession, and certainly has really really impacted on their ability to pull in resourcing from overseas that has been relied on quite extensively in the past. So so look, there was a significant amount of the increase that relates to that. We also know exactly how tight that employment market is, because we're finding that at council at the moment as well. So so long and short of it is, I guess what you're seeing here is a recommendation from me that we accept these proposed fees. I also refer to the moderation process that I know is used by the Auditor General's office in terms of setting these fees and making sure there's not outliers. In fact, actually further to that, I understand that although Leon can talk to this, I understand that 8.9% is not uncommon. That pretty much is quite a quite a common adjustment within the local government sector. So so without further ado, officers are saying, look, let's hear from Leon in terms of this. But I guess what we are recommending is that we get this letter signed, we move ahead with the audit and get the audit complete.
Thanks, Ken. Very helpful and very good summary. Leon, your comments, buddy.
Yeah. Kia ora, Bruce. Kia ora koutou, everybody. I don't think there are any surprises. I raised this last year, and to be honest with you, I can talk about it, but I think Ken has basically said everything I was going to say. So he summarized it really, really well, and I agree. 8.9% year on year is quite high, but it is to drag the audit fees more towards the amount of hours required to do the audit. So I've spoken in the past also about how the auditing standards and expectation of audit quality expect us to do more. It's unfortunately unavoidable, and of course the impact of COVID-19, as Ken said. But I'm not going to repeat everything he said. Rather take questions if there are any.
So members, on page 231 of 307 of our agenda, along with previously Ken's good year-on-year sample or example, we have Leon's split. I was about to say 50-50. My maths isn't quite right, but I'll round it to 50-50 salary cost movements, which make up part of that 8.9%, but also essentially what you're saying, Leon, the right sizing of the job, which has been subject to moderation with the OAG. Obviously, well, both have been, but essentially where the cost increases come. Members, is there any discussion that you'd like to make on this? Comment on this, members? Yes, Andrew. Andrew, you need to, can't hear you, mate. You need to put your mute on off.
Want to? There we go. Sorry about that.
Here now, mate. Perhaps we should have left you on mute, should we?
Yeah, probably. Yeah. No, look, I'm very comfortable. Our finance team does everything to mitigate audit costs and cooperate with our auditors, and I'm happy to move the recommendation.
Thank you. And for what it's worth, I'll second it, seeing that's the case. Leon, Ken asked me about the fees before the meeting, and obviously I've seen a wee bit of this around the sector, and not that the committee have heard it, but my advice is, look, we accept this in the way that Ken said and move on with one proviso, and that is, Leon, that you have kept us fully informed, kept us in the loop, and as far as we can tell from our side, received the service. And my argument to Ken was, as long as you keep that up, mate, we won't question the fees. Now, that's me, Bruce Robertson, talking. It's got to be with the rest of the committee, but you can see I've already got a proposer to move that. Thank you, Andrew. And that really is my key thing. Please keep up the good flow of information. Obviously, we'll be keen to see on the quality, but in terms of actually pressures that are on you when you can deliver, give us early warning, all those sorts of things which are part of service is really, really important. So thank you, Andrew. I've seconded. Is there any other comments either on the motion or indeed any questions of Leon or Ken at this stage? There being none, I'd like to move to the motion then, please, which is actually double folded. We should be aware of that. It's actually to obviously need to find it. Firstly, it's obviously to receive Ken's report, but it's also to authorise Jim to sign the fee letter or proposal letter and return that back to Audit New Zealand. So we're accepting this as valid. So Andrew, thank you for your motion. I will put all those in favour. Please say aye.
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 Those against? It's carried. Brilliant. We go, Leon. Liz, thank you for being here. I do suspect you want to get off because we need to have lunch as well. Ken, is there anything you need to say? I've got your hand up, buddy.
Yeah, Yeah, so Bruce, look, I just wonder if through the chair, if we could perhaps perhaps just hear from Leon and Liz just in regard to progress on the audit. Well, I say progress on the audit, but they've actually only just started today. But look, I know actually that Leon did perhaps have a thought or two to share with the committee. So I think this is probably the appropriate juncture for that.
Absolutely good. Thank you, Leon.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I know you want to go to lunch, so I'll keep this very short. We only started this morning. And so what we've decided after we heard about the COVID cases in the Waikato, not to send our staff out, but to keep them at home until we know exactly what's going to happen this afternoon. That won't impact, sorry, careful wording, Leon. That shouldn't impact on the audit as such, because we've been through this, we've done this before, we can audit remotely. We're also using a really good tool these days that I think you're aware of, which is called Audit Dashboard, which makes it clear information we require and when it's expected and as it is received. This is not a tool to blame anybody, but to ensure that we are as efficient as we can be, both on our side as well as on Ken's side. So with that start, what we've done today is our staff will work through what has been received and see, are there any big gaps? Because we can't afford to not be extremely busy and highly efficient. We just don't have the staff. And if we can't complete this audit within the timeframes as set out, we will have to pull out and come back in the next year. Sorry, I'm not threatening. I'm stating facts. And you know me that I'm rather upfront and clear instead of surprising you late in the piece. So that's where we are. I'll keep you posted through Ken, if we have any concerns.
So just remind me of when you hope to have the audit done by and be in a position to give us audit clearance, Leon.
You've got me there. I think it's end of October. Yeah, Liz is nodding and she knows everything, so it must be end of October.
Yes. Okay. And you are assessing the information you got through Audit Dashboard at the moment. Any sense when you'll have had a chance to see whether you can keep to your timetable, Leon? Or Liz, perhaps? You're probably doing the hard yards here. Any sense of when we might, in other words, front-loading the issues, when do we know that you're sort of comfortable you've got the stuff that you need?
Or Wednesday. So we've got an internal catch-up Wednesday morning, and we'll update Ken and his team after that.
Sweet. Okay. No, I appreciate that. Given I've got 2 audit committees in the last week before Christmas, I appreciate indeed what the challenges are to get these audits through. Ken, any response from you at the stage, or we just take that as advice at the stage?
No. Look, that's fine. So we've had multiple discussions with Leon and Liz over the past few weeks. So so the expectations are clear, and we're fine with those. Yep.
Well, Leon, well done for making the call to keep your staff safe in light of the uncertainty. Somebody reminded me of Hauraki rather than necessarily Waikato, but look, I appreciate that, and I do appreciate you trying to work through these circumstances. You can hear from us that we're very keen that you keep up the directness that you've already given us in terms of audit timing and what have you, and do appreciate that. I'll receive that as just as information. I don't propose that we do anything other than say thank you to you and Liz for being here, Leon, and wish you well with the rest of the work. And members, we probably have one other paper we should have done before lunch, but I do propose at the stage that we deal with that post-lunch. It is now 22, so I'm 9 minutes late, aren't I? I think it is, Ken, so thank you for helping me get forward. Can I suggest we meet back at 1:10 Folk happy with that? Might give you a chance to catch